Today, both Leica and Nikon. I'm going to talk about some of the cool new stuff in Firmware 3.0 for the Leica Q3, and then I'll talk about something that I missed and didn't talk about that's really cool in the Nikon Zf Firmware 2.0. Well, hey everyone, it's Hudson. Welcome to this week's video. So it's gonna be pretty short, pretty sweet. I'm gonna talk about some of the cool new stuff in the Leica Q3 firmware version 3 that just came out, 3.0. And it's applicable both to the 43mm version and the 28mm version. There's one thing in particular in this firmware that I just love. There's a bug that is not fully fixed in this firmware that I wish was. We'll talk about that next. And then finally, I'll mention a feature that's in the Firmware 2.0 for Nikon's ZF camera that I hadn't really thought that much about, and because so many people talked to me about it in the wake of my video a couple weeks ago on that firmware, I thought I would mention it. So if you're a Nikon user, a ZF shooter, and you're really most interested in that, just move your mouse along the timeline or your finger along the timeline on your phone, get to that back section. All these things are chaptered out. There's also a linked table of contents in this video's full description, along with links to all the gear that I'm talking about, the cameras and all the gear that I use and recommend. You know, you can always run over to hudsonhenry.com to ATS/ATS links to see all of the gear that I use and recommend. And those links really help me out. So I thank you so much for that. You can also just click right here to go there. So, all right, so let's jump in. Let's talk about what's cool in the new firmware for the Q3, the version 3.0. And I will say one thing, bravo Leica for making a really nicely laid out, big fonted, easy to read guide to the firmware that starts with an executive summary of every major thing that changed. I love that. That makes my life easy. And it's infrequent that I see that kind of user support. So it's really, really nice. So one of the first things they did was they added some USB-C capable microphone support to the camera, which was sorely needed because it doesn't have a microphone input and it does beautiful, beautiful video. And so some of the best video microphones out there are now supported via USB-C. You just plug USB-C into a mic like this Rode Video NTG mic and slip it into your hot shoe. And you have to run into the menu. So another mic that's supported that I love are the Rode Go wireless lav mics. I'm using one of those right now to my Z52 to record this video. So to set that up so that you can do USB mic input, you got to go into the menu and you go down the menus to, I think it's page 5 under camera settings, go over to the right and come down to USB settings. And you can turn on whether or not you want USB-C power delivery charging when you plug in a battery bank. And you can turn on whether you want USB microphones to be active or not when you plug them in. And the nice thing is those things are not mutually exclusive. You can turn it on so the camera recognizes whichever one you've plugged in, along with plugging into a computer, uses the camera like mass storage, shows up like a hard drive to transfer photos. So you can have all that stuff turned on. The camera's smart enough to shake hands with whatever device is plugged into it. So that's just smart and a really, really nice system, all right? They've reduced the blackout times between frames when you're shooting bursts. They've fixed a few little bugs, like connecting to the Leica Photos app could sometimes have some bugs, particularly if you were connecting with multiple phones. The start delay for shooting at 15 frames a second, the fastest burst mode, has been reduced. We're talking about milliseconds in these blackout times and reduction in the start time for burst shooting. But every millisecond counts, and I'm appreciative that they're doing that kind of thing. As well as their intelligent autofocus, it's switching between AFS and AFC, you know, whether it's continuously tracking a subject or locking on a static subject. They've improved the algorithms on whether the camera how the camera recognizes which mode it should be in if you let it do that. I tend to choose AFS or AFC myself. They've also improved tracking performance. Now, I will say, these are not exactly cameras that I would choose to go out and shoot birds in flight or automobile racing with. You know, it's more shooting the crowd and the people, and potentially though, now and then you want to shoot a blurred car moving by with this camera in wide angle, slow shutter, and having it track that that focus, it's really, really cool. And it's great that they're working on improving all that stuff. Occasionally I shoot burst modes with like my kids running towards me in relatively wide angle. It's nice that there's less of a blackout time between. So it's really good on Leica working on this stuff. I think they have a little ways to catch up to Sony and Nikon and Canon in this regard, given that they've traditionally been very into manual focus cameras for decades, but they're catching up quickly, and I'm impressed with how they continue working on it. So bravo on that. A few other little things, but the big one to me is autofocus, auto area lock. All right, and let me show you why. Oh, we got powering off there, but if I come in here, I'm going to take my lens cap off so you can see, you know, my studio, you guys recording on the Z FW back there. And I've got a print of a bird set up right here. And I have my function 2 button programmed in all of my profiles, all of my user profiles, to do a limited number of functions. If I long press that function 2 button, the one right under the exposure, the shutter speed wheel on the right, there's 2 buttons there. The one on the right, if I long press it, I've limited the number of functions that that button's capable of doing to autofocus lock plus auto area lock, autofocus lock, AF assist lamp on or off, and focus peaking, all right? And what I generally leave it on is autofocus lock. And by the way, there is a new set of profiles downloadable. I'll give you a link in a minute for that when I finish this discussion. But when I have autofocus lock enabled, in prior firmware versions, you would push that button and it would lock on a subject, you know, it would lock the focus, and you could move the camera around some and it would stay locked, but then it would time out and stop being locked. And if you took the picture, it would lose the lock. All right, and that's really kind of unhelpful given what you're after with autofocus lock. All right, the whole goal is to be able to lock and then recompose and shoot as many frames as you want. They just fixed that. All right, it's not exactly back button focus like I might dream of, but it's locked. It's locked for multiple frames, and it's locked until I push it again and unlock it. And that is really, really huge. A lot of us have complained, a lot of us have asked for them to make the lock a solid lock. The fact that it locked for a few seconds and then quit while you were recomposing or adjusting exposure was really annoying before. The fact that you couldn't fire multiple frames with your lock in place was annoying. This is a usable focus lock, and it works whether you're doing auto exposure lock, autofocus lock, or autofocus plus auto exposure lock. So that's a really, really big one. Now, as I said, these are in my user profiles. You know, the way I access my user profiles is in the first press of the menu button, you get your sort of quick menu there where you can flip between video and photo. And on the right, at the top of that list at the bottom is all of your different profiles. And I set up one for standard, one for black and white, one for landscape and panoramas, one for face and eye detect, one for action, and then I have an open one that I tweak and change given what settings I might want at a given moment. And one thing that Leica does really, really well is storing these profiles internally and letting them control every menu function in the camera. You know, whatever it's set at, when I go in and I go into, I believe it's on menu page 4, user profiles, you go in, you can choose a profile, or you can go down to where it says manage profiles, and when you have all your settings the way you want, you can go in and save and rename these profiles, all right? You can also back out and you can export those profiles. You can export them to the memory card, and I share my user profiles with this community. Anybody that wants to download them, they are downloadable for free, and I have a new set of user profiles for Firmware 3.0 over on my website. All you have to do is click, you know, right here. I'm sitting close on that side of the frame, but if you click right here, it'll take you to my free download section, which has camera profiles for all the cameras that I use. And I have a brand new one for Firmware 3.0. Now, sadly, that brings me to the one bug that I really wish Nikon would fix, or that I really wish Leica would fix. And I've talked to them about it. You know, I put out a feature request, a bug report, and they called me and they confirmed it, but still after several firmware updates, it's still active. And it involves that very function 2 button that if you save your profiles and you have the function 2 button programmed to do something other than what the camera does stock out of the box, which is flip between video and still shooting, it doesn't matter. It doesn't lock that new setting in. The minute that you program the profiles in and go into a new profile and you press the function 2 button, it flips to video. Now, unfortunately, in the video mode, it does lock the function 2 button setting in. And so pressing the button again does whatever function you have set in the video settings for function 2. So not so great. So the only way, you know, when you do that to get out of shooting in video mode is to press the menu button and choose to go from video to photo. It's frustrating for people. I have a whole video on how to fix that. And once you've fixed it, you can continue to update your presets. And it's only when the camera is in its default state, which Leica resets the camera to default state when you download the new firmware version. So the minute you download the new firmware and then reinstall, you import your profiles through that manage profiles section, just like I showed you. You go onto page 4 into user profiles to the bottom and say import profiles. And if you have a profile on the base of the root directory of your memory card, it'll install all of those profiles. You're still going to find function 2 takes you to video, even if it's not set to do that. Hopefully Leica will listen and fix that. I'll hit them up again about it, and hopefully that'll change. But there's a workaround, and you can click, you know, right over here again. You click right here, and you can go to my website, or actually there's a video. I did a video on how to fix that. So just check out that video, and also the video is linked on my free downloads page with the user profile. So there you go. All right, download those, have fun with them. Let me know what you think. All right, so that's basically it for the Q3 firmware. It's not a major update, but that autofocus lock being sticky is amazing. All right, so give me a second. I'll reset. And I'll talk a little bit about one more feature in the Nikon Zf Firmware 2.0 that I should have talked about before. All right, I'm back again with Nikon Zf mounted here for the Nikon Zf Faithful. And I just want to talk about something that I glossed over a couple weeks ago when I did my Nikon Zf Firmware 2.0 video. You can click right here to see that video, or in this video's full description if you missed it. But one thing I didn't talk about are a few changes that they did to the ISO wheel and ISO controls and how we interact with ISO with the ZF. And they didn't seem as important to me sort of as I went through the firmware, but after talking with numerous people and comments on the YouTube channel and thinking about it and playing around a little bit more with my ZF with it, it is pretty cool. So I thought I'd do a little addendum and put it here on this at the end of this Leica Q3 video. And what it basically is, there's two different things that they did. And one is more geared towards a shooter like me that shoots always in manual mode. You know, I shoot in manual mode, and sometimes I have auto ISO to do some automatic exposure when I'm working in changing light conditions, handheld and such. And sometimes I'm locked in ISO. And traditionally, I've just sort of kept this camera in the command wheel mode and used my movie record button to control ISO. So in that way, I can press the movie record button, hold it down, and the back wheel changes the base ISO for auto ISO, and the front wheel turns auto ISO on and off. So my middle finger while I'm holding that button down switches auto ISO on and off, and the back wheel sets the base ISO. I don't want it to fall below. Now, what Nikon has done now is made the command position, the C position. You have to push the button to come out of C position into the other ISO settings, which are delineated in thirds of a stop between, you know, 100 on up to 51,000. They've made those independent of each other. So if you set the main camera to have ISO turned off in the main menu, in the shooting menu, you turn auto ISO off, then all of a sudden when you flip from C to 100 ISO, you might be in auto ISO in the C mode with your settings controlled by the movie record button, but the minute you flip into the manual ISO settings on the dial, it turns auto ISO off if that is set to off in the photo shooting menu. And that's pretty great, because the minute you want finite control of ISO, you get to use this beautiful dial and just pop out of C mode and put it on whatever ISO you want in third of a stop increments. And then the minute you want ISO, you just flip back into C. And for me, I'm still gonna control that via the movie record button because that lets me set an independent base ISO. But for those who don't tend to switch off of the base ISO, you know, there are times when I'm shooting things that are moving and I don't want the ISO to fall below, you know, 800 ISO. This camera shoots amazingly clean images at 800 ISO. So maybe I'll set it so that it doesn't drop below 800 ISO just to keep my shutter speed up while it's running. Other times I'm out in bright light, beautiful conditions, I set that base ISO to 100 with the movie record button. You know, otherwise you'd have to go deep into the menus to do that. Now other people might always leave it at 100 ISO. They're not really shooting moving subjects in lower light. And so they can use the movie record button for something completely different and flip between auto ISO and manual ISO just by pushing that center button and popping out of the C mode, the command wheel mode, into the manual settings. That's really nice. Now the other thing they did is in the custom settings menu, B3, under metering and exposure, there's easy ISO. So B3 is now easy ISO. And what that does for people that are using shutter priority or aperture priority, whichever command wheel isn't active in that mode, you know, say you're in shutter priority, well, you are setting shutter speed with the back dial. The front dial doesn't control aperture anymore. The camera's controlling aperture. So in easy ISO, if you turn that on, suddenly that front wheel will control ISO. So you have shutter speed with the back wheel, ISO with the front wheel. It'll flip if you're in aperture priority, and the front wheel will control aperture, and the inactive back wheel, because the camera's controlling shutter speed, will control ISO. It makes it a little bit easier to manage your ISO if you're a person working in those automatic modes. I used to work in the automatic modes, but these days I do everything in manual exposure and just keep my eye on ISO and control that either via auto ISO or manually with the dial. So whichever way you work, there were improvements made in working with ISO with the ZF, and Nikon deserves some accolades for that, and everybody out using it should know about it. So I thought I'd just put it in this video. All right, everybody, so that's it for this week. I'm in Costa Rica while this video launches with a cool group of people shooting monkeys running through forests and birds in flight and all kinds of fun stuff with David Archer and Dennis Valverde. In other words, I'm having a really great time and out with a great group of photographers. I hope all of you are finding ways to stay safe and stay creative. We'll be having an office hours on May 13th, 10 a.m. Pacific. Big group photography get together. You can click right here to sign up for that here on YouTube or over on Zoom. You can submit a question for Rick, David, Darren, and I hope to see you there. And you know, I hope that as the season is changing where you are, you're finding things that excite you and working on your creative storytelling. And just keep at it, keep it up, keep sending me those great questions and comments, and we'll see you next week.